My name is Bill Chesnut. I'm a principal consultant for Mexia, which is based in Melbourne, Australia. I grew up in central Kentucky. I was born in Cincinnati, but I've been in Melbourne for the last 15 years. So I came back. I'm going to the MVP Summit next week in Redmond, so came back to visit the parents on the way, since it's about 27 hours of travel for me to get from there to here. I tend to like to spend more than a week. So I volunteered to come along. This is the talk I delivered at Ignite New Zealand. And I'm getting ready to deliver the same talk at Ignite Australia in about 3 weeks' time. So basically it's creating API apps and logic apps. How many people, and I'm really a BizTalk guy. That's what I've been doing for about the last 12, 14 years. Doing BizTalk, but now I'm doing a lot more integration, cloud integration with the BizTalk services and then with API apps and logic apps. How many people have actually looked at the API apps or logic apps at all? How many people know what I'm talking about? Okay, I'll step back a little bit when we get into that, and I'll just explain a little bit about what it is. So the agenda for tonight is basically we'll look at the Azure App Services. So a little bit broader view of the app services side of things. And then we'll look at the API apps and logic apps in depth, and a few of the tips and tricks around some of the stuff you need to learn. There is a lot of caveating around this. This is all in preview now, and it is going to change. So 6 months from now, it won't look anything like this, most likely. And we'll just look at some of the ideas really more than anything. So we'll look at the Azure App Services. So I wanted to go into a little bit of a history about integration, because I think that kind of positions where the stuff is at. So basically, if I can get out of the way of the projector. So we did integration. We've done integration for a long time. I did integration back in the early 90s, but we were doing code. Eventually, we got into some of the SSIS and stuff in SQL, things like that. Then BizTalk Server in 2000 came along, BizTalk Server. And then the initial offering in Azure, when they actually launched Azure, there was a BizTalk Services in there. Didn't really have a lot to do with BizTalk, but they called it BizTalk Services. And then about a year later, they renamed it to .NET Services. And then they brought another BizTalk Services out about 2 years ago. And it was basically targeted around the EDI traffic. What they did is they were going after particularly the value-added network market for EDI, and that's pretty much what the capabilities are for BizTalk Services. We were all sitting in Redmond last, I guess it was December, at the BizTalk Summit that they had out there, waiting for them to stand up and tell us about version 2 of BizTalk Services, and they said, BizTalk Services is going to stay where it's at. We're going to a new API apps, logic apps concept. And that was actually brought down from on high. How many people know Scott Guthrie or know of Scott Guthrie? So basically, his idea was the fact that BizTalk Services was very much a silo of integration in Azure. He wanted something that went across everything in Azure. And that was the whole idea behind the API apps and logic apps, is that goes across everything in Azure. Makes it easy for everybody to integrate, not specific BizTalk people. It's opened up to a lot wider group around that. So that's why we've got now the Azure App Services. And what you will notice about that is the App Services now contains like the websites and things like that. Now, I also want to talk a little bit about why hybrid integration is going to be so important in the next probably years, is the location of our users. How many people are dealing with users that are purely mobile? So basically, your users aren't in your enterprise anymore. They're not inside your firewall. So your integrations are all going to have to be something with the cloud and everything. And also the services. How many people are using a CRM that's online? So Salesforce or something like that, where that's not in your enterprise anymore either. And then again, as we start talking about the big data and things like that, That data is not going to be in your enterprise. It's going to be out. IoT has just got potential to have reams and reams of data in the cloud. So, and then how easy is it to spin up a virtual machine in Azure compared to on your enterprise? Can you go through your enterprise paperwork and get a virtual machine in 15 minutes? So that's the other big thing. The computing resources are going to be there for us. So all of those things are a real driving force around this hybrid integration. And what we're going to see is a lot of the stuff they've done around the API apps and logic apps is around enabling this hybrid integration. So the app services components as they stand at the moment are the web apps, which was formerly API, the websites, the mobile apps, and they keep talking about whether they're going to rename that or something. And then there's API apps and logic apps. So, and I think one of those may disappear because I think they're going to do a little bit of merging with the API apps and the web apps because there's not that much difference in them now. A little bit undercover stuff that's happening, but I think they're going to basically just allow you to consume them from your logic apps also. And logic apps, it's a new piece. It's the workflow type component. The big difference over previous workflow engines that we've seen is that everything in your logic app is a API app. So you're not writing any code really in your logic app. It's just connecting APIs. And you got a few different types of APIs. So you've got a connector API. So it could be a service bus, pulling a message off the service bus, writing a message down to on-premise through a file connector. But really all the logic app does is pass data between the API apps. And we're going to see that. So, yes? It's a little bit of a stretch to call it an orchestration piece, I think, because there's really not as much logic as I've seen in most orchestration engines. It's a connecting shapes. So it doesn't have, at the moment, it does have a little bit of do while and things like that, but it doesn't have that typical flowchart look to it. I know they are in the process of redesigning the designer because it goes from left to right and it's really clunky when you get more than about a half a dozen things involved. It's really hard to visualize, so they're gonna change how it's visualized. But at the moment, they don't have anything like a decide. They have conditionals on each API app that you can say this runs if this condition is met. So it's still a little bit rough to really call orchestration, I think, at the moment. So we'll look at what I want to do is the demo I'm going to do is going to have a custom API. So I'm going to build an API, upload it into Azure, and use that to get us a message from Service Bus. How many people have used Visual Studio Online? How many people are aware of the service hooks in Visual Studio Online? So when you check something in, you can get a notification. Or when you save a work item, you can get a notification. So the example I'm going to do is when you save a work item, it's going to get a notification through Service Bus. The API, the logic app's going to wake up, look at the message that came. If it's a approved work item, it's going to go and call the REST service for VSO and download the attachment that's associated with that work item and drop that into a file location on premise. This was actually a real-world problem for one of our clients because what they were doing is they had several external vendors that were building code for them, and the only way they could get it into their network was somebody walk it in on a USB key, and that just really wasn't the most efficient way to do that. So we designed this to where we're using that hybrid connection to drop that. They put it in VSO Online, somebody approves it, it then gets downloaded into a secure environment through the file connector. So nice thing is that the API apps are based on the websites currently, so you've got all the debugging, all the configuration stuff that you had with websites available to you in the API apps, and I'll demonstrate some of the debugging. It also makes it so I can have reusable components. So they've put a bunch of them out there they've already built that are like the service bus, file, SQL, FTP, all of those different ones. And they're hoping that a raft of community people build these. There's also other vendors that are interested in building these. They're working on a marketplace model where you can charge to use it or charge per transaction. It just depends. And they're also working on a marketplace that would be an enterprise marketplace. So if you're a large organization, you could have some people building API apps that the other people in your organization could consume in that enterprise marketplace. Again, the marketplaces they're looking at are the ones that Microsoft supply, different vendors. So if you've got a product, so say Salesforce might create an API app and upload it to the marketplace for you to connect to Salesforce from your Logic app. Community ones, a lot of the MVPs are already looking at several. One of the MVPs already wrote some helpers for the metadata markup. And then the enterprise one I think is the really interesting one, especially in larger organizations, because they need to be able to share these kind of APIs that they build with the other developers inside of the organization. So they have a marketplace that they can get to and put those up there. And the other way to do it is you can build your own. And that's what I'm going to do tonight is I'll walk through how we build one very simply. So we'll go into having a look at how we create one. Now what I've done in this is that I've tried not to spend too much time for us watching me code. So what I've done is I've started the project here in Visual Studio. I've given it a name of BizTalkBill VSO work item updated. So I'm going to basically respond to the work item updated event that comes out of Visual Studio Online. And just quickly I can show you how you set up that. If you go into your Visual Studio Online, there is in your collection that you're using, there is service hooks, and basically you configure a service hook, and there's a whole lot of different things you can do service hooks for. So basically for Azure Service Bus, you can get a build complete, code checked in, team room message posted, work item commented on, created, updated, and it supports sending a message to a notification hub. So if you were just trying to push this out that something's been done to a whole group of people that could subscribe, that way you would go with notification hub, service bus queue, or a service bus topic. So, and then you've got a whole lot of things in there. We've been fairly impressed with the number of service hooks that are already out there. The only one that I've got that I've asked for but I haven't got any response to yet is I want a build queued, because I'm a BizTalk guy and I want to have a build server setting in Azure that I can respond to a build queued and spin up the virtual machine, and then the build would happen, and then when it was done I could look at the completed and I could spin down the virtual machine so that I didn't have it running all the time. Because a lot of our clients, they do a build once a week if they're in maintenance mode, and you just don't want that virtual machine sitting out there spinning the whole time. So that's just a little bit of an idea on the service hooks. It's going to let me get rid of that. And so we'll go back into Visual Studio. So what we want to do in Visual Studio is we give it a name. We go, it's a ASP.NET web application. When we hit OK on that, we get a whole list of different types of ASP.NET web applications. And with the latest Azure SDK installed, you now get the API apps preview. And basically that just is the Swagger and things like that, to the markup and everything it needs to make it look like a API app. So I go OK to that. And I've cheated a little bit because I didn't figure you wanted to watch me type in a lot of this code that I need. So I've got a bunch of NuGet packages I'm going to run that just chunks in some code for me. So basically what you have is a typical web API here. It's looking for some models. It needs a controller. It gets a default controller, which we're going to just delete to start with. So what we need to do is we'll go up here and we'll do a manage NuGet packages. And we're going to go out to NuGet.org to start with because we want to update the JSON support. It's got an earlier version of JSON in there, so we'll just upgrade that to the latest version. And it's prompting me for my Get password. For some reason, even though it's not getting the NuGet package from that library, it still wants the password for it. So that'll go off here in a second and update that. And then what we're going to do is we'll add the T-Rex library, which is the metadata markup. He had to make it a neat name, so he called it T-Rex. He's one of the developers. If you've heard of Quick Learn, they do a lot of BizTalk training, and they're doing more API apps and Logic app training. So he's one of their developers. He's created this to make it easier to do the markup. So far, that's not really added anything to our API app. But once I get these installed, I've just got a couple of code snippets I'll put in there. I just do a input model and an output model. So basically, it's just a set of strings coming in and strings going out. And so I'll go there, and the first ones I'll do is I've got one on my public repository, which is the definition of a work item updated. So it's the JSON message that I'm getting from VSO. And just to give you a little bit of a look at that, I've got one of them up in my mail. That's what it looks like. That's the JSON file. Don't expect anybody to read that, but what I've done is there's a couple of websites out there that you can paste your JSON into, and it will give you a C# class. So I've done that, and I'm going to put that C# class into my code. So I'll basically do an install on that guy. And what we'll see over here in the models, we'll get that model showing up for the work item updated. And then I've got a couple of other ones in my private NuGet repository. So it's the demo work item updated controller, and it's got the two models for the input and output to go along with the controller. So now we'll see we've got our controller and we've got an input. And what I did with this is, in the spirit of the way the API apps work, they don't really hold any configuration. You don't want to have to deal with configuration in the website config of the API app. So what you do is you pass everything into it. So like here is the VSO user and VSO user token. So that way, whoever uses it has to pass that data to it. There's nothing in the configuration file sitting in the background that you have to maintain. So basically, we pass the content, which is that JSON message coming in, and then the encoding, which attachment status wants to be downloaded, and which wants to be emailed. So if you put it in as committed, it gets an email to a person. They log on to VSO, and then they approve it, and then that attachment status, and then it downloads the attachment there. And then output, all we have basically is the status of the work item that came through, the attachment, and it creates an email body for the email part of it, and then an output type that says either email or attachment. That way I can use that to do a decision of whether I download the file or whether I send an email in the Logic app. And let's see, the controller, I'm not going to spend a lot of time in here, but basically I brought it in. If you're not careful with the service bus messaging, it tries to do a string encode, and it puts a bunch of characters at the front of the string. As it turns out, VSO's got a little option. You can untick the box and it puts it in as just a string. But I put code in here to work with either one. It just rips that off. Also, for some reason, inside of the JSON file that they produce is invalid to C#. So you can't turn it into a class because it's got dots in the middle of the names. So I did a nice little convert it, the system dot something to system underscore something so that I can make a .NET class out of it. But then basically it just goes in here, serializes the JSON object, and then goes off, calls the REST services for VSO and downloads the object. Does a base 60, and on down here I've just got a little bit of code here that returns the content in base 64 encoding. What I found is it doesn't, passing between API apps, it doesn't like binary. It needs to be something that's almost like email, where it's a base 64 encoded string. So that's pretty much what we need to do there. We can go over here now, and if I've included everything, I should be able to do a build. Okay, that's built. Now we go here, and what I've done in preparation for this, just to make it a bit quicker also, because for some reason things seem to take a little bit too long in Azure when you're trying to demo stuff. So what I've done is I've gone off and created just an empty API app in the portal called Work Item Update. So there's no code or anything. You just go through and say new API app, give it a name. There's nothing there. So what I'm going to do is from Visual Studio then, when I do the publish, it gives me an option. So I want to do a new Azure API app, and it shows me the existing API apps. So I pick the BizTalk Build VSO Work Item Update, and it will download my publishing settings. And then basically I'd go next. Now I want to change this from release to debug, so later on when we build the logic app, we can actually go in and set the debugger. So, and we'll publish that guy up. It's working much better than it did in New Zealand because the internet dropped out about halfway through the publish. So, which was really fun when you're doing Azure stuff. So that's going to do the publish now. It's usually pretty quick on the publish, and then basically we're going to hop back to the slides because that's the base groundwork that we've got. And it comes up with this, says it's permission for the service, because inside of our logic app, it's an internal call, but the publish tries to call it externally, and it won't because it's marked as internal still. So you get that error page up, but it still has published out successfully. So what I'll do is I'll hop back to the slides. So now what we want to talk about is the logic app. So right now, the API app, I could call that by itself if I wanted to, and it would do exactly what it says to do. It'll take those input parameters and give me those output parameters. But where we want to use it is our logic app. And basically, a logic app is a collection of API apps. So if you think about Windows workflow in the past, basically you had a set of shapes. You could create some custom shapes. If you think about BizTalk, there was a set of shapes that you could use in your orchestration designer. Basically with logic apps, it's any API app that you can publish that has the right Swagger definition that exposes it to the logic app to call. And it is a workflow. At the moment, it's very rudimentary workflow. Hopefully, they'll be enhancing some of the workflow capabilities. Since the preview release, they have added a do while. So one of the things you can do is you could get you could do a poll and you could get several items back, and it'll let you loop through. Like one of them is a Twitter connector, so it can get back all of the tweets about a certain topic that have happened in the last hour, and then you could loop through each one of those tweets and do something with it. So I guess the big difference between any of the existing workflow engines and things like that are out there now is everything is an API app. And basically, we do have a few different models. We've got a push, so we can push something to the logic app. So that's typically our Azure Service Bus. We're doing that. We could do a pull, so we could have a we've got one right now. Because we needed a static IP address for our Logic app, at the moment, you have to have an Azure, an app services environment, which requires 6 cores, which is about $1,000, I think. And we needed to do 15 messages a day with this. So we spun up a virtual machine, put a little website on it, and our Logic app hits that and then downloads it with a static IP from the bank to get some files. So that's a pull. So basically we tell it to every hour call the website and see if there's any files to process. We can do repeating too. We can just tell it to run every 5 minutes. And we also can have one that's manual. Now, why would you do one that was manual? Because something else may need to trigger it. So if you've got and this could be a process in SharePoint, somebody submits something, you could have something in SharePoint that just uses the REST interface to Logic apps to say, go run this Logic app. That way you don't have to go through that polling. You can have, and you also can have one Logic app call another Logic app. So you just have that second one set up as manual. It's not going to run on a schedule. It's not going to be run by a message being dropped in. It just gets hit by another Logic app. The nice thing we've also got is live debugging. I've suffered through BizTalk's ability to do live debugging now for about 12 years. So this is really good. I can hit it with the live debugging. And again, extensibility. I can create any API app I want, doing connecting or just processing data inside of there. So now we're going to go out and we're going to create let me page back up. We're going to go create a Logic app. And I did find an interesting side effect when I was working on this demo, is that I tried to create the same named Logic app as I had 2 hours ago when I finished testing the demo. It had all the artifacts that were still there. There's a cleanup process that happens in the background at some point in time. And so as soon as I gave it the same name, I had the completed Logic app pop up. So I'm not sure how they're handling that going forward. But basically, I just need to give it a new name. So I'll grab that. And we'll go in here, and we can go into the new portal. Not the Logic app, we'll go to API apps. And we'll add an API app. Give it a name. And then basically it's defaulted to the last app service plan that I used. So I got BizTalk Bill 01. And the interesting thing is all of this virtual machine I'm using right here is running out of the Melbourne Azure data center. So not bad response time for the fact that it's pretty much halfway around the world. So basically that's the location. And I can go in here and create. That's going to go off and create just an empty Logic app. I could have went through there and done the trigger piece and defined it now before I hit create, but I also can create an empty one and then just start adding the pieces to it from there. So we just got to wait for this little guy to create. And for demos, this is always a good one too, because it could take anywhere from just a little time to a long time. So then we go to triggers and actions. This brings us up the surface. One of the things I'll talk about in a minute, there are some templates out there of different things they think you might be doing, but we're going to do just a create from scratch. And what we'll see over here on the right side is we'll see all of the API apps that are in my subscription, or in my resource group. So basically we're going to start off with the Service Bus connector. The Service Bus connector has on when it's the first shape in there, has basically message available. So I click on message available. I tell it what frequency it wants to check. So this is really a polling of the Service Bus, but you can set it pretty low. So I'm going to set it just for a minute at this point. And then I click on the little green check, and that sets up that. And then what I'll do is I'm going to put my API up next, because I want the service bus message that comes back from the service bus get message, or message available. So I'll put that in. And then what I need to do is I need to fill in all of the components of the work item update. So I need to tell it where to get the contents from, and what you'll notice is now I've got a little bit of a menu there, and it says basically the message available content. So that's my content, the message available transfer encoding, and then what I need to do is the attachment status, and I'm going to cheat just a little bit to make sure I get all these names correct. So I want the attachment status to be approved. And then the email status, oh, wrong one, to be committed, not with all the stuff on the outside of it. And it was a little bit of a jump for me too, because internally all this stuff is stored as JSON. Being an old XML guy, it's a little bit getting used to that. Now I need to get the VSO user, and so basically I've got my user, and so I've got a demo downloaded user ID, and then I've got a very long key password key in there. So I'll go back to there, and I will push the token in. So now I've got all of the configuration I need in there. And sorry if I was trying to use the key pass so that when I did the recording, I didn't have to go change a bunch of tokens. So basically, that's got that piece ready to go. So what then I can do is I can go in here now, and I can drop the drop it in. You just basically click on it, the file connector. So that wants to be the next step in a certain case, and then I also I'm going to drop in the Office 365 connector. Now, if you don't have Office 365 and you want to do email from Logic Apps, there is a SMTP connector. They've also written, it's out on the GitHub repository for Logic Apps, a SendGrid adapter. The SMTP adapter sometimes has trouble with SendGrid, so they wrote a SendGrid specific adapter for that. So now for the Office 365 connector, we do have to authorize it. And what it's basically going to say is I need to log on to your Office 365 account and make sure that you do have access to that account to send mail through it. So now that's authorized. So for our file connector, we're going to upload a file. And we get a set of events of things we need to fill in. And then we want to do, for the Office 365, we want to do a send email. So our file path, I'm going to go back to my notes here. So the file path is going to be and now the Logic Apps have their own workflow. So basically it's going to be that attachment file name and then the actual content with the content encoding. So let's go and we'll go back to there. And so the file path, so what we'll see is that down here in my work item update, I put out a bunch of things, but the UI is a little bit rough at the moment, so you can't see what the name of those fields are. So I'm thinking that we'll check that in a minute, but then the content I think is the second one. And then the transfer encoding is base 64. And we'll go ahead and save that because I want to show you I'll show you in the code view. So you can actually get to this in the code view. And then on the 2, I'm just going to send it to bill@chesnut.net. And my subject can be work item updated. and then the body of that wants to be out of my work item updated, the email body. There are a couple other fields here. I can do a CC and a BCC and importance and attachment and things like that if I need to. I don't need any of those at the moment. So the other thing I want to do is I only want the file connector to work when it's a attachment to download. So I've got some conditional that I've built. So if we look here at my notes, we'll see that in the conditional expression, we'll see that we can have a expression that says where the output type is email. So that's what we want to do is to say when our output type is email, then we want to send an email. So if I go back to there, and then for my email connector, what I do is I say add a condition, and then I push the condition in there, and then I go down here and save that. And it kind of repositions it because it knows it's mutually exclusive on that. So now then I go grab the other condition there where it's the output type is attachment. And then I add a condition. And then what I also could do is I could have another Office 365 connector that will handle any error conditions that I run into. So if any of these other shapes fail, I can then grab that and pick up that information about the error. But basically that's, and this is, you can see why they want to do something with the designer. It's got a little bit of rough edges now. So now if I hit save, that saved it. Then we can look at the code view. And so we've got a bunch of configuration information about our tokens at the top. Then we have our trigger. So there's our TFS integration service bus connector. And then we go down here to our first action, which is our work item update API app. And you can see its input parameters. And then we go to our file connector. And I did reverse them. If you notice there, I put the attachment into where it's trying to put the file instead of it. So basically what I need to do is I need to make that it's got two dots there, the attachment file name, and get rid of the file name at the end of that. So that'll be what I want to do there, and then down, and that's my expression where it's attachment, and then there's our email connector. I will save that. So our API app's now ready to run. So I can close that window, go back to there, and what we've got down here is we can see trigger history, how often it's triggered so far. And so every minute, it's only done it once so far since I saved it. And it skipped that because there wasn't a message available. So I go out here to my work item. I've created this work item with a very simple attachment attached to it, and I'm just going to update the description. It's in status, and I'm going to change the status this time to committed. So they've committed the status. It's not ready to download, so I'll save it. And what we should see here, and I'll go ahead and close that one, and then we should go back here to our trigger history. And because it's on a 1-minute trigger, we'll have to wait just a little bit for it to trigger that message. So, and if you got something that's high throughput, you could set that to a couple of seconds. Typically, the minute works really good, except when you're demoing it, of course. But so basically, that trigger will kick off in a second. Oh, see, it's already started running over here. See the line there? You can click on that, and you can see that it's run, and 2 succeeded and 1 was skipped. So the one that was skipped is the file connector, because in this particular case it only wanted to send the email, not download the file. So then we can go up here to the mailbox, and if the Office 365 is working good, there's a work item updated email that just arrived. Just for the body, all I did was put the JSON out there. You could do anything you want to in formatting that email up to where you want it to do. So then basically somebody would go back in, open up that work item, change the status to approved, and maybe update the text, and then do a save and close. I'll go ahead and bring up, it's using the hybrid file connector, so there's a folder on my virtual machine that's my demo file drop. So what we'll see in a second, and when it fires that trigger again, it'll drop that attachment file into this folder. So, and this virtual machine does not have any external connections open. It's got all the firewalls coming in are blocked. It's only got firewall open on the way out. So it's using the hybrid file connector uses the service bus relay to accomplish that file transfer. And there's our file. So if we go back now to our Logic App runs, we'll go here, and we see the first one. Sometimes it takes a little while for this dialog, but you'll see that it succeeded twice. The dialog sometimes refreshes really good and sometimes really slow. But there's the next one. If we click on it, again, it's got 2 succeeded, but this time the Office 365 connector was the one that got skipped. So basically, that second time, the attachment status was approved. And the nice thing I can do is I can go in here and look now. If I click on that, I can see the inputs. So there was all the inputs that went to my API app. Really good debugging information, because I can go look, why didn't it work the way I expected it to work, because I can see everything that got sent there. And I can also then look at the output links and basically see what came out of my API app. So, and the other nice thing is there's connectors for OneDrive, for Dropbox, and all those kind of things. So you could put these attachments and stuff somewhere else instead of, yes?
So you built your Logic app completely in the portal.
Yes.
Right? What if I wanted to version control that? I wanted to, because there's a lot going on in that file. I guess I could copy and paste it out. But
well, if you'll bear with me, there is some PowerShell I'll show you later on that will, it's not 100% picture yet, yeah, but they are working on the ability to use the ARM templates. So basically, I've got a PowerShell just a little bit later on that will export that Logic app as a ARM template. Okay. So, and that's what you're going to end up having to do. That's number 1 on my list. They have to make work, because I'm going to have a dev subscription, I'm going to have a UAT subscription, and I'm going to have a prod subscription.
You certainly want to have
And I'm not going to do it on the portal, or I don't want to have to do it on the portal. So let's hop back to the slides. So we got our Logic app working. So one of the things I want to talk about, they are going to have some predefined templates. So if you've got something you need to do and do it on a regular basis, you can create a template for it. So that'll add to that level of reuse that you can get. So if you wanted one for VSO messaging, you could do something like that and just create that template, then you would have to do it. They're also looking at putting those templates in the marketplace so other people can reuse those templates. So trying to get that level of reuse, because a lot of people do the same thing. They just do it with different configurations and different connectors and things like that. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the debugging process of this. And this is one of the things that I really like, is the fact that I can now go in here to my API app, and I can set a debug breakpoint. I go over here to my Azure Cloud Explorer. I open up my resource group. I find my work item updated API app. I right click on that and I say attach debugger. And about 1 out of 5 times you get the timeout on setting the debug. Sometimes it works. So we'll see how I go. So this will set it in debug mode. I'll then just need to drop another message in, and then I will be able to do full debugging on that. You do have to remember when you publish to publish it as in debug mode. So you get that little screen pop up there, but the debugger is set. So we'll go back to our backlog item. The way I've got it set up, I can just open that guy up. I'll just change one of the text fields, and I'll save and close. And go back to our API app. We'll just have to wait a second for that trigger to fire again. And then basically we'll be able to see full debugging on that. So we're loaded it, and now we're in breakpoint. So now I can look at that input content string. So I can do an add watch. Oh, actually I have to do it on the input. Add watch, and then we can look at the input, and we'll see that there's all of our input values. And then I can set another breakpoint on down there and continue. And I can completely debug through this API app as many times as I need to. And then continue. And then if we go back out to the file system, we'll see that second file is out there. So that's the nice thing I like about the fact that they're using the web apps and the websites, is that all that debugging worked there previously, and it just works with the API apps. So now we'll talk about a few of the tips and tricks, and that PowerShell is one of those things. The resource manager side of things. So this is something that's fairly new to the Azure. So anybody that's been doing stuff with the ARM templates, this is all part of that whole idea that you can build up everything you need for your application in that ARM template and then run it, and basically it will go verify that. There's also, if you go into Visual Studio, there is a Logic app and a Logic app with API apps, and what it does is it creates some base templates for you. It doesn't have any of the data in them. You have to hand code the JSON, which I'm hoping for a designer in Visual Studio, but I'm not sure whether I'm going to win that one or not. But it also then has a PowerShell command that gets put in that Visual Studio project that will deploy it. So it does all of that. So let's go have a quick look at the PowerShell. So I've got a PowerShell window up over here, and I've already logged on to my subscription. And so basically you have to do that, switch to Azure Resource Manager mode, which then it tells you that this is going to be removed in a future release. That got basically put there as soon as they put it out. So then what I want to do is I can get all of the resources in my resource group of BizTalk Bill 01. So basically that just shows me all of the different types of resources in there. So the API apps creates a gateway in the background to handle the security and things like that. Then there's the server farm, there's the gateways, there's the website that gets created, then there's the API app. We'll see that on down there, there's our file connector, and our Office 365 connector, and our service bus connector, and then our work item updated 3 Logic app. Okay, so what I can do is I can actually go here now and grab this next PowerShell, and what this is going to do is it's going to drop the file into a directory, which is under my BizAdmin. So if I go here into my File Explorer, into my users, BizAdmin, there's a Logic app JSON file, and then I'll basically open it with code. How many people have downloaded code on their machine yet?
Use it every day.
You got to have it. Yeah, it's a good little one. No, I haven't.
It will not let you paste anything into a file.
Oh, okay. So basically, this is the JSON file that you saw kind of in that designer view. It needs to be formatted a bit better. Does that work in there or not? No. As it is Control Shift. You can do some cleanup on the JSON file, but basically everything's in there that you need to deploy that to your next environment. You have to update some of the gateway stuff. This is something I've been working with the guys from the product group on, trying to make this an easier process, because I need to be able to go into Designer, design it, pull it out, take it to the next environment, and not have to mess around. Because the other ones, I've had other guys that have been working on a project, they've started in the Visual Studio project and hand-coded everything, which to me, I've got a nice designer in Azure. Why do I have to hand-code it to do it in repeatable process across my environments? So then we'll have a little bit of a look. The other place you're going to do things is in the Azure portal. We've got our app services plans, our resource groups, our API apps, and our logic apps. So we'll have a quick look at the Azure portal. So if we go back into the portal, we'll see that we now have, and this was a recent change, we now have all of those things listed. So there's our app service plans. And now, if you're just playing with your app services and you want stuff to be very responsive when you're testing it, you want it to be probably in a standard small edition, which costs you about $50 or $60 a month, and you decide that you're not going to play with it for a month, you don't want to waste that $50 or $60. So what you can actually do in your app service plan is you can go in here and you can click on the pricing tier, and you can scroll down and make it free. You do have to stop anything that you've got running out there, but it's a way to get around paying it. You can't kind of turn it off, but you can turn it to the free tier. So that takes care of that. So like you can see, the other one I've got out there is sitting on the free tier at the moment. Then we can look at all of our logic apps that are defined out there and what their statuses are. You can also go in, if you don't want them, you can disable them so they're not running. And then you can look at your API apps that are associated with it. So I've got, in this particular one, I've got a file connector bad. Now this is one of the issues I ran into, and I wanted to show you really quickly, is that I had trouble getting that hybrid file connector configured. For some reason, it decided to fail. And what it turned out to be is the file connector is an API app. The API app creates a gateway, and the gateway, or is it this host? I think it's that host there, has the configuration settings in it. And if you look down here at the application settings, this is where we have our configuration settings. And this is where they stored the service bus connection string. And that's what happened. For some reason, when I configured it, the service bus connection string was blank. So tried to connect, couldn't connect. But also, this is also where if you decide, and I had to do this a couple of times, this is what you tell it where the root path is going to be on the other machine inside of your network. And they gave me one folder, and then 2 days later, they decided they wanted it somewhere else. So you had to go navigate through the host to that to change that folder, because that's the root folder. And then in your file connector, you can put subfolders on top of that. So like I can drop it into an in folder, and I can also use the file connector to pick files up on premise and bring them up and process them. So I could put them in an out folder and pick up those files to process. So the hybrid file connector works in both directions. The other one I will mention, if we browse again, is the app service environment. And this is going to be more prevalent going forward, because this is going to be the recommended way to do it if I want to access it via a VPN. So right now, all these API apps are out in the wild. But if I want to put them in a network and I want to connect that network to my on-premise network through a VPN, what I do is I need to create a virtual network first. And then I can go create an app service environment that uses that virtual network. So that way, all of these API apps, logic apps that I deploy into there, I can decide with my virtual network ACLs what's exposed to the outside world and what's not. Or if it's just for things on-premise to hit it and come back, I can do it that way. The only downside to the app service environment at the moment is there's a minimum of 6 cores premium to make that run. So a standard right now is about $60 or $70 for a core. The premium's about $140, $150. And this is preview pricing, and then when it goes GA, it'll be probably twice that. So it's going to be about $1,000 minimum a month for a app service environment. Some of the premium connectors, so a lot of the BizTalk type connectors for EDI and things like that will require an app services environment. But the thing it's multi-tenant really, because you could have all of the things in your enterprise using that one app services environment. So that's going to be an easy way to do multiple things. You're just going to have to manage it a little bit. And then you can control if you need to spin up more front-end servers or back-end servers and all that kind of stuff. You can control that. So in summary, basically, if you're interested in how to do integration in the cloud, because I really think there's a really nice sweet spot. So if you've got a CRM or something like that already sitting in the cloud, it'd be an ideal place to put your integration. I've also run into a lot of logistics companies that have on-premise integration software that talks out to the cloud and gets data from the cloud and then shoves it into their warehouse management system. So you could do that with some of the hybrid connectors, set that in the cloud, or you could even do some of the pre-processing. So if you had some complicated processing, so you do some of it in the cloud and then you drop it with a hybrid file connector, or you drop it through service bus messaging. One of the other ways we've done, Service Bus does have a limitation of 256K message, but what we've done is the, what's it called, claim check pattern. So what we do is we put the big message into Azure Storage, we put the URL to the Azure Storage into the Service Bus message, you send that down on premise, and then your service goes up, grabs it out of the storage and brings it down. And that way you're not passing that big message all the way through. All you're doing is passing the location of the message through. So basically, there are going to be some changes to the way the API apps are working. It's going to be more and more like a web API. So there's not going to be a differentiation, I think, eventually. They haven't given us the full details of what they're doing with that. But I think they figured out that the gateways and stuff are making it a little bit complex, so they're going to try to simplify that side of things. So it's out there to play with at the moment, so it's out there to try. We've actually got a customer live already with the blessing of the product group. We've got a customer live that's not a very high volume side of things, but it worked out just as a really sweet spot to do. So basically, it's grabbing files from their bank and dropping them into a file share on premise, and they're being picked up by SAP. So, and it was a fairly simple one to do. The only complex we had was the fact that it needed a static IP address, and we had to use a Azure virtual machine and a little bitty website to do that. But that was easier than the app service environment at the time. So when they get more stuff into the API apps, Logic apps, we'll probably move it to an app services environment and not have to have that virtual machine. So there's lots of stuff happening with this. So they're doing updates to this on a monthly basis. And I think there's a call tomorrow morning. If you're interested in API apps, Logic apps, there's a Logic apps call tomorrow morning. I think it's 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning. They do it through their YouTube channel. So I can send you the link. I don't have it with me, I think, right now, but I can send you the link. It's normally 3 o'clock in the morning for me in Australia, so it's going to be very enjoyable to listen to it at 10 o'clock in the morning instead of 3 o'clock in the morning. So And there are my contact details if you've got any questions or are interested in any of these kind of things. Basically, just reach out to me. And this, I did the recording on this. We'll see how it works. I'm testing this wireless microphone through Camtasia, so we'll see how that works. If not, Ignite New Zealand, you can go out and listen to. It's up on Channel 9. You just go to Microsoft Ignite, Ignite New Zealand, and look for Bill Chesnut, and there's my talks up there. You can download that one from there. Thank you very much.